methods in the New Testament. But a lot of what the Pharisees are wrestling with, like, it's so easy for us as Christians to look at the Pharisees and be like, oh, the bad guys, right? The Pharisees were the devoted ones. They were devoted to the Lord. They were devoted to the kingdom. They were attempting to, they were like modern Christians. They were attempting with everything in their soul to really keep Torah. And so if Torah says you need to give, Jesus interacts with this, right? Like, you're so good at at measuring out 10% of everything. And they would obsess about how to think through this. You know? Imagine, by the way, if your wages weren't like, here's how much you got paid. Oh, it's just a simple math to get to 10%. Right? Imagine if your income is a barley harvest. Oh, all right, I gotta count that out. Oh wait, but we also grew a little bit of cumin. All right, I gotta shave off 10% of that. We grew some dill as well, and we have olives. But then, so I gave 10% of my olive harvest, but now I've pressed it into oil. Do I give another 10% of the oil? And now I took the oil that I got from pressing my olive harvest, and I used that in trade with the cobbler to get these nice new shoes. Do I need to tithe that, right? You're obsessed about this stuff. Why? Because you're trying to keep the letter of the law. Sabbath. I mean, oh my goodness, you owe it to yourself someday to read the rabbinical regulations on the Sabbath. That's amazing. And you would read it, and your first impression, at least mine was, way back when I started hearing some of this stuff, I was impressed at how anyone could be such an idiot. Right? Like, seriously, you're telling me the number of eggs I can boil before it becomes breaking the Sabbath?
Wow.
The number of letters I can write before it becomes breaking the Sabbath, et cetera, et cetera. Why is it, for example, that modern Orthodox Jews will not drive on a Sabbath? Anyone know? Because one of the Sabbath prohibitions is not to light a fire and an internal combustion engine, so they all have to go electric. Well, it's pretty awesome. They've been liberated by the invention of the electric car. Right? But we kind of laugh about this stuff, and you read them and you're like, well, how can you get so ridiculous? Mm-hmm. Well, it's easy to get ridiculous when you want to be faithful to God's command to keep the Sabbath, and you got to sit down and think, at what point am I breaking the Sabbath? And you start to codify all that stuff. Right? We do the same thing. So anyway, ancient Near Eastern law, this is what's intuitive to them. And that's what I was walking you through on Wednesday. And when in that article, Krista should have forwarded on an article by Josh Berman. There's a section in there where he describes the difference between statutory and common law. All right? And I just thought I'd put it in your hands in case you wanted like an actual kind of detailed description. In that article, he's interacting with stuff that has no concern to you. He's doing all of this background because his agenda in the article is to talk about authorship theories of the Pentateuch. You don't need to worry about any of that, all right? I merely forwarded along the article in case you wanted a detailed, like, what is the actual background that allows Eric to say this? That's why I forwarded the article. So, why? It's an interesting question. Why do you think this is the norm in the ancient Near East. I know you don't know, so this is the time for random guesses. Rachel?
My first thought was because like paper and ink and stuff weren't as common, and so oral, like tradition and oral stories and things are easier to pass down, so it's easier to remember a story as opposed to, I don't know.
Nice.
That's good, Rachel.
Definitely part of it.
Can
Yes.
you repeat the question, please?
Why is this normal and not this?
In the ancient areas.
Like for ancient Israel? Definitely an issue. What else?
Well, I think piggybacking off of that would be, it's easier to listen to a story than it is, and remember a story, and, than it would be just a list of things to do.
You're definitely correct, but I'm only talking about legal text. So you're absolutely right as it pertains to story, but let's limit the discussion to actual legal text, which we have a lot of, by the way.
Isn't the statutory too legalistic? Like it's too, there's too much room for people to like go around it and like act like, oh, well, like you were talking about that, like one, you know, I'm not using this animal, I'm using that one instead, so I'm not breaking the law, when they know that.
Yeah, all right, now, brilliant. Not right, but, but brilliant. What? Think about it. Why was what Honor said brilliant right there? In other words, what direction did she go?
God's heart.
Oh, well, that
Or I
would
guess
make a lot of
people.
sense, but that wasn't at all. I was thinking much more mundane than anything that has to do with God, right? Do you see how she assumed this one and what could go wrong with this one and said, so let's do this instead? The problem with that is this was unknown.
Oh.
They're not starting from anything like this. This grew out of this.
So while I was thankful that Noah asked you to repeat the question, because I was actually writing something like that down at the time. I said, for me, the example of keeping the Sabbath, the laws around this are man's way of codifying or putting putting parameters in place to explain the how of the phrase.
Can you say that again? I got lost.
That's okay. That's how I write every day, so that's why. That the laws around keeping the Sabbath became man's ways of putting parameters in place to explain the how of the phrase, keep the Sabbath.
Oh,
Because
explain
keep the
how to keep
Sabbath-
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Keep the Sabbath is too general for someone who is the type A personality of, well then how do I do that?
Yeah, they're answering how to keep it. Yes.
Can you give an example of how they would speak the common law? As
Don't
opposed-
muzzle an ox while it's treading out the
Okay,
grain.
so that's the common, okay.
Absolutely. Yep, for sure. All right, let me give you a couple things, all right? First off, let me explain why this would be the natural thing you would come up with. Then, let me explain how we got from here to here, okay? All right. And I might get so excited that I forget to explain how we came from here to here, so just remind me if I forget. All right, let's talk about this for a second. What does ancient Israel look like? I don't mean like, oh, it's brown, but sometimes green. Like,
Communal living.
what does that mean?
People lived in closer proximity to each other, less privacy. You relied on your community more than you do in our culture, etc.
Okay. What else? Some of that is correct, by the way.
Which part was incorrect?
If you're a shepherd, you don't live any closer to anyone else. But
Generally
the
speaking.
cities, the cities are definitely packed tighter. What else?
It's agriculture based.
It is an agrarian society, agriculture-based. Agriculture is everything. Okay? This is why famine is talked about so much in the Old Testament.
You mean that by like life and death, right?
Oh yeah. Everything. It's an agrarian society. Crops don't work, you're gonna struggle to feed your kids.
So would that make it also more trade-based than coin-based?
There is no coinage in the Old Testament until this very, very, very late stuff, right? So like, there could be, I'd have to double check, I don't know for sure. You pause the video for a second? No, I'm kidding, you don't have to pause it. There may be coinage in the background by the time you're into really late, like Ezra and Nehemiah, but I'm not even sure about that. Okay, there's no coinage. What else? How is society structured? It's a family structure. Family structure. All right? And family is the analogy for all structure, all societal structure.
Can you describe that more? I mean,
Yeah. I'm setting it up to describe it more. Yeah, for sure. Because it is not intuitive. I still wrestle with how to explain it, to be honest. So think about how your family runs, okay? And think for a moment, I'm going to use a traditional family for a moment just to get the idea across, okay? So you have traditional family, so parents are in charge, right? If you have kids, you're in charge of your kids. How do you deal with your kids in terms of issues of right and wrong, or training them up in how you want them to act or be or whatever? What do? You teach by example. What else?
The things that your parents did to you, you take, and then the things that your parents did.
Yeah. Let's say you don't want your kids jumping up and down on the couch just for the fun of it.
rules.
What do you do?
Make a rule.
Before that,
Sorry.
before we get to that level, what do you do?
Tell them not to.
You tell them not to first, right?
You just go right to
That's it. Unless you're Amanda, it's like, I don't care if it's your first time, well, bam, right? Let's deal with this. Making a memory, you know? No. Right. But here's the thing. How many of you, as parents, you said, oh, shoot, we're having a kid. Well, we better sit down and write a law code that we can put on the refrigerator. And the text is going to be the law. We better make sure that it's thorough, right? Because we don't want our kids finding loopholes, even though they always do. You know, etc. Right? You get what I'm saying? You don't function that way as a family.
No.
In the ancient Near East, the society as a whole is based on a family model. It's how they think. All right? It's not that they sat down one day and said, hey, what model should we use to build our society? Well, I don't know. We could use this model, that model. Let's go with family model. No. It's intuitive to them. It's how they opt, it's how everything works. Okay? So, the families typically, the nuclear family for them is different than for us. Nuclear family for them, multi-generation, right? You're gonna have the grandparents, if they live that long. Average lifespan's way less, by the way. You're gonna have the grandparents, if they live that long, the parents, the kids, right? They're all together. And then you're gonna have, let's say you live in a city, okay? Now, cities, let's just get something clear. Cities, 12,000 people, right? Small town Nebraska, right? 12,000 people, small town Nebraska. 12,000 people in the ancient Near East is a metropolis, okay? Massive city. These are the urban folk. They live in a walled city of 12,000 people. Wow. All right, now, cities in the Bible. What are leaders called in the Old Testament? The town what? The elders. The town elders. That's a family word. They're taking the fact that their whole knowledge of an authority structure is the family. And so they start extending it out. This is why you'll get words like the father's house, father's household. That's kind of your multi-generational nuclear, right? Your father's household, your clan. It's still the idea of a family, but now it's bigger, right? We might not all actually be related or whatever. You know, it's, yeah, all the cousins are included or whatever, but it can be bigger than that. This is all gray. You know, it's not like they sat around and it's kind of like us today. Now, is that a town or a city? I don't know. Does it have more than 48,642? Because that's the definition of moving to a city. Like, we don't think like that. Same with them, right? It's just like, oh, the clan. You know, it's gray as to what exactly that is, but it's bigger than the house of the father, the clan, bigger, the tribe. Okay? But they would still think in terms of the elders. And when you get to a point where there are kings, they would think of the king as the father. They would think of the queen as the mother. That's an authority term, by the way. Okay? Part of calling God our Father is calling him the king, basically. So, my point is that you think of how you operate with your kids. You know, don't jump up and down on the couch for the fun of it. You tell them. You don't try and codify it into a law code, right? And it's super funny, and this is kind of an aside, but think about what can happen. This would happen with our oldest all the time, right? So you walk in, and your kid is jumping up and down on the couch. And you're like, you know not to jump up and down on the couch, so you're in trouble. How does the kid respond? I wasn't jumping, I was bouncing. Right? Now, what happens? As a parent, there's a huge temptation to be like, to strangle them, to whatever, to get ticked. But what's the thing? You're operating, there's a temptation for us, it's intuitive to operate this way, and there's this thing in the back of your head that goes, oh crap, I did say jump, and I didn't say that includes blah, 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 and you start running all this crap as a parent, right? Now, I knew nothing of this when I became a parent, by the way, but I just operated like this because I didn't give a crap, right? It wasn't because I was so smart that I could figure out a family should operate as common law. I was just like, dude, you're in trouble. I don't care what you say. You know, yeah. I was too bullheaded. But my point is that in a common law environment, don't jump on the couch is the expression of a principle. And I can absolutely hold them accountable to the principle. Right? So the reason this is intuitive in ancient Israel and in the Old Testament, it's because of that. Because it's family. You got to read law like you're listening to a parent say, "Don't jump on the couch." That makes sense?
Yeah.
All right. So how did we get from here to here? Hellenism. Alexander the Schmo screwed everything up. All right. You guys catch the?
Yeah.
All right. So, Alexander the jerk, who forced me to learn Greek. You know, if he had never ruined everything, I wouldn't have had to learn Greek. So, anyway, what happened with Hellenism? Alexander usually called the Great for no good reason, is he's conquering the world, right? And converting everyone to Hellenism. Well, you now have a very intercultural society. And like on Wednesday, we talked about tipping, right? Americans, you go out to eat, you tip. That's the cultural norm. And if you're in a bunch of Americans, you don't even have to talk about it, right? Introduce someone from a place where that's not the norm. And then let's say we throw in 5 other cultures that all have different norms than that, different variations, et cetera, et cetera. And now we have to write some law. That's how statutory law came about. Hellenism, as it is putting the Hellenistic culture over top of all of the different cultures that are coming under the empire, they have to move towards statutory law, where you have to spell stuff out in text because you don't have the cultural norms, right? Let's look at some of the Book of the Covenant, all right? Book of the Covenant is the term we use for Exodus 21 to 23, basically. All right.
You said Exodus 20.
We'll start in 21, I think.
21 to 23.
Yep. I feel like I should do the slave law with you because my students always like that one. I've done that one for so many years. I'm totally bored with it. So that's the internal dialogue you're watching run through. You know, why does he voice? All right, Exodus 21.
What if you did one for you and then that one for
Yeah, we'll start there. That'll be good. That'll be good. I jumped around on Wednesday, so. All right, let's look at Exodus 21. Somebody read, Tyler,
Yes.
would you kindly read Exodus 21, 1 through 11?
Yes. The New International Version, I'm sure you're dying to know.
Right on.
These are the laws you are to set before them. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he is to serve you for 6 years. But in the 7th year he shall go free without paying anything. If he comes alone, he is to go free alone. But if he has a wife when he comes, she is to go with him. If his master gives him a wife, and she bears him sons or daughters, the woman and her children shall belong to her master, and only the man shall go free. But if the servant declares, I love my master and my wife and children, and do not want to go free, then his master must take him before the judges. He shall take him to the door or the doorpost and pierce his ear with an awl. Then he will be his servant for life.
Did a cheesy Christian tune just run through your head?
No.
Anyone?
I was thinking.
Anyone know that thing?
What?
Oh man, when I was a kid in a youth group, we loved singing this "Pierce My Ear" song. Y'all don't know this one?
Not at all.
Wow.
Please sing it.
You guys
Please
have
Please sing it.
It's like "Pierce my ear, oh Lord." You know, you get all
Wow.
weepy.
Yeah, it's a slave for the Lord, yeah.
Yeah. Take me to your door this day, for I will serve. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah.
Do they have any
And every
other-
time someone reads that verse, that's all I can think of.
Should help out on Sunday mornings
No, that's not.
with
What?
worship.
Yeah, I know. You're welcome.
Okay.
We're gonna use that for worship next week.
I love it. Bring it on.
Picking up in verse 7. If a man sells his daughter as a servant, she is not to go free as men servants do. If she does not please the master who has selected her for himself, he must let her go, be redeemed. He has no right to sell her to foreigners because he has broken faith with her. If he selects her for his son, he must grant her the rights of a daughter. If he marries another woman, he must not deprive the first one of her food, clothing, and marital rights. If he does not provide her with these three things, she is to go free without any payment of money.
All right. Okay, first thing, verse 1. Anyone have a translation other than these are the laws? Anyone have a word other
These
than
are
laws?
regulations.
I have.
Okay, regulations. what else?
Ordinances,
Ordinances?
Yeah.
Really?
yeah.
These are the
Agreed.
rules.
He doesn't like
Rules?
Better put it that way.
All right.
So you're trying
Ordinances?
So I gave the big spiel about the word Torah, and the word here in verse 1 is not Torah. It's the Hebrew word mishpatim that comes from the Hebrew verb shafat, which means to render a judgment, to judge. Okay? So right off the bat, you have a disadvantage in English because, well, let me rephrase that. You have a disadvantage if you're looking at the word laws. Okay? Because automatically, like we said, we're going to trigger, oh, the text is the law. And I've got to keep the letter of the law in order to keep the law. Right? Fortunately, in Hebrew, it's tipping you off to the fact that we're in a common law environment because it says, here's some judgments. Think about what that means. Here's some finished cases that you could look at. It tips you off right away that we're dealing with case studies. Does that make sense? All right, common law. It's common law. Okay, so what we're looking at, you have to think of this as you're looking at the end result of some sort of legal case. That doesn't mean that there was an actual legal case that led to this. That's not what I'm saying. All right? But what I'm saying is they're writing in the form of a rendered judgment from a legal case. That's what they're doing with common law. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So, what's the first thing they say? If you buy a Hebrew slave, he's to serve for 6 years, but in the 7th year he goes free without paying anything. Now, do you see how the next verse is then, if he comes alone, he's to go alone. If he doesn't come alone, do you see how there's a kind of a big picture idea presented first, and then we're going to give variations of the theme. Okay, you have to notice that, because what you're going to do, it's what we all do when we're starting. It's okay, but it's wrong. Is you start muddling it all together. You'll start trying to come up with some principle that is covering all the parts at the same time without recognizing that what the parts are doing is it's giving you variations. And so you have to treat the variations as a variation. So here's what I mean by that. All right, so the very first thing is verse 2. The very first segment of the law is verse 2, right? If you buy a Hebrew servant, he's to serve for 6 years, but in the 7th he goes free without compensation. Okay? I will, so first off, one little translation issue that there's no way you could know. Probably some of your translations say, in the 7th year he's to go free without compensation. And some of your translations will say, in the 7th year he's to go free without owing anything. Those are very different in English. Okay? Here's the problem. In the Hebrew it says, in the 7th year he's to go free, chinam. And it's like, what does chinam mean? Well, chinam is a Hebrew word that means without obligation. Who's the one that's without obligation?
The freedman.
Is it the freedman who has no obligation, therefore he goes free without having to pay anything? Or is it the owner who has no obligation, therefore he goes free without getting paid anything? That's the issue. We don't need to worry about it or settle that in order to understand the principle of the law. Okay? Just wanted to point that out because y'all have different translations and it always kind of creates a problem. So, the basic first law that we're dealing with is if you buy a Hebrew slave, serves for 6 years, goes free in the 7th. Okay? So, here's the method that is very, very easy to understand. This is like, how do you shoot a free throw? Well, you just throw the ball through the hoop. I'm about to give you the Bible version of just throw the ball through the hoop, right? Which makes it sound super easy. And then we're gonna like butcher it. It's a lot of fun. All right. So first off, we remember the text is not the law. The text is an expression of a principle, right? We said this before. Okay? Principle. Now, here's the deal. Maybe a more, since we're dealing with legal text, this is actual legal text. Since we're dealing with actual legal text, let's use a more legal way to say it. The text is a case study, right? Or another way to say it, the text is a made up legal judgment, right? In other words, you're reading the case study, you're reading here's the result, okay? And so your job then, right, if you're given the result, your job is to go, oh, okay, how did we get there? Without any text that tells you how we got there. It's amazing. I love this genre. It's so cool. All right? Okay? So the first thing we recognize, the text is not the law, the text is a case study. All right? Once we've done that, all right, so here is step 1, here is step 2. Then what we need to do is we need to pause, and this is where the their town stuff comes in. Okay? We need to make sure that we understand just the basic terms they're using or whatever. Okay? So I'll call step 3 their town. But it's really just, let's make sure for a moment that we understand the words. Or the cultural background or the whatever. So here's what I mean. By the way, I sort of skipped. I should have put in, when I'm working with graduate students, one of the steps is like, I make them break down the law, like where's the big thing and where's the variations, etc. I'm just gonna give that to you, okay? So we won't worry about that for now. But, all right, so their town. Starts out, if you purchase a Hebrew slave, some loaded terms. Okay, so you have to say, what does that mean? All right, what does that mean? Their town. Okay, first off, Hebrew slave. Okay, you have to observe that. The Hebrew slave means you're purchasing a family member, most likely. Not always, but most likely. What does it mean? Why would you, in an agrarian society, purchase a slave?
Language.
Yes and no. What else? Let me ask a different question. How would you get put up for slavery?
You owe something.
What?
You owe something.
Yes. And who puts you up for slavery?
Your owner.
What? No,
Your
you don't have an owner.
Yourself.
You're being put up for slavery in the first place. How does that happen?
Yourself.
What? No. See, that's what's super
They
interesting.
do it themselves.
Yes. You're doing this yourself. Okay? All right? The reason I point this out is, like, slavery in American history, I've read the stuff. I mean, I've looked at the actual documents. Slavery in American history was justified by white slave owners using this text. Okay? So let's just keep that in mind. And then we're kind of in the background asking ourselves, well, does what's going on here apply to what happened here at all? Obviously the answer is going to be no. Okay, but how so? Can't tell you the number of times I've heard someone say, including pastors, say that slavery was say that slavery, like American slavery, was just accepted in the Old Testament. Okay? This is why we have to take the time to define some terms. How do you end up in slavery in this context? Indebtedness. How do you end up in indebtedness in the first place? It's an agrarian society. Okay? So there's no I went to the bank and took out a $10,000 loan and can't pay it back. How do you end up in a tough spot?
Borrowing food or.
Why would you borrow food in the first place?
Hungry.
Why don't you have it? That's what I'm trying to get at.
Crops didn't come in?
The crops failed. Okay? This is an agrarian society. So think about it. I can have this farm plot and have an amazing harvest, and I can be on this farm plot next door, and for whatever reason, some disease hit my crops and not his.
Unfair.
This is the norm in an agrarian society. Okay? So something happened and you're hard pressed and you can't grow your own food, tend your own flocks, whatever it might be, to take care of your family. So what do? Let me ask the question this way. Pretend for a moment, okay, that you live outside of town or whatever, and you decided to get into hobby farming or whatever, and you're like, oh man, I'm gonna do this. I'm having so much. I'm able to provide for myself and everything, right? And so you just decide I'm gonna make my job my hobby farm, right? You're working for yourself. You know, you don't have to put up with a boss. It's awesome. But then, the hailstorm wipes out your stuff. What do?
Go get a job.
You go get a job. Oh. What's another word for getting a job from a Hebrew perspective? Slavery. You put yourself into slavery. That's what they're talking about. Okay? And this is a clan-based structure. So the assumption in the background is, of course, you're going to start with your family, your extended family or whatever. Right? You're going to go talk to your cousins. You're going to say things like, hey, don't we have a kinsman redeemer in this town? Kinsman redeemer. I'm referencing Ruth there. Right? This is within the clan. Okay? So, you already have a cultural norm. Okay? The Exodus isn't coming up with this. All right? You already have a cultural norm that we're independent, agrarian, we're independent, the ancient Near Eastern version of independent farmers and tradesmen and this kind of stuff. Something goes wrong, I gotta go get a job. The phrase we use for that is, if you hire someone, the phrase we use is hiring a Hebrew servant. Okay? I'm oversimplifying a little bit. but we're fine for our purposes, all right? So that's normal. So this opening line, if you buy a Hebrew slave, this is normal. This is just saying, hey, if you're gonna become the boss for someone who has hit hard times, in the normal way that we do stuff. There is nothing new or unique for the Israelite people in that first phrase. This is just saying, hey, if you do this thing that we do. Make sense?
Yep.
So the real meat of the Torah comes in the next line. All right? And what's the next line? Serve for 6 and what?
Freed on the 7th.
Serve for 6, freed in the 7th. That's where you need to look for the heart of God. Okay? So, what's it telling you? What? When we say serve for 6, free in the 7th, what is that? What principle back there is it possibly expressing? Let's brainstorm some ideas.
Allow them to rest.
Okay? So one option is allow rest. What else?
Your contract with them has a time limit.
Okay, time limit, contract. What else? We're just brainstorming. It's all right. Say some crazy stuff. Debt's canceled.
Say some crazy stuff.
Maybe it gives them enough time for their field to come back from the disease or whatever happened.
Is it in the 7th year they take a break anyways, so they wouldn't need the work?
Yeah.
The year or the whatever?
Jubilee.
Jubilee.
Maybe a little land rest.
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about?
What's that?
They could start over.
Yeah, I don't know why
So
they
good.
6 years.
So good or so bad?
That's his
Well,
people.
what else?
Does that go back to, about what we were talking about on Wednesday, like, about, like, if you're getting something from your servant, like both parties benefiting, so then, like,
Oh. Okay.
give them a break kind of thing.
All right. What else? Any other ideas?
They can start over.
Okay. That's good. That gives us a run. This is the process, by the way. You read this and you start going like, whoa, what about this? What about this? What about that? Okay. So you're doing great. All right. Now, first off, a little background thing that you might not be aware of because you probably don't read a ton of ancient Near Eastern law. Like, I'm just assuming not many of you have worked through the Code of Hammurabi in Akkadian.
Nobody did.
All right, so it's pretty awesome. Not gonna lie. All right, so although the laws of Ur-Nammu are way better, but anyway, that's because they're in Sumerian instead of stupid Akkadian. So, all right, here's the thing. Okay, here's.
You're tracking with them, aren't you?
Yeah, it's awesome. All right, now. This only comes with time and seeing how a lot of this stuff, you have to see a ton of ancient Near Eastern law for this to become intuitive, all right? It's super easy for us to look at a line like, he will serve for 6 years, and assume that means it's gotta be exactly 6 years, okay? Everything can be negotiated, right? In other words, what it's telling you is serve for up to 6 years, but it doesn't need to say up to because it's assumed by the way law works. But that's not intuitive to you, that's why I'm telling you. Okay? So they might make some deal, hey, I'm gonna work for you this year and then I'm gonna go back and do my own crops next year. All right. But the law is not saying you can't do that. If you're gonna work for someone else, it's gotta be 6 years. Because the law says serve for 6 years. That's not what it's doing. Okay? It's giving you a term limit. All right? Now, if I'm right, if we're putting a term limit, on work that is the result of debt, where might we lean on this list?
Debt cancel.
Debt cancel. This is debt cancellation. This is a very ancient Near Eastern way of saying, way to go, Kevin.
Come on, Kevin.
Let's go. We gotta give Kevin.
Yeah.
All right, that's it. That's it. I like it. That was false. This is a very ancient Near Eastern legal way of saying no perpetual debt. Okay? No perpetual debt. So this was great. We did the process. We brainstormed. If you were in seminary, I would make you wrestle with it a lot longer. I would make you read articles about slavery and come up with this stuff on your own. But you know, welcome to D school.
Thank you.
D school. The D should stand for done, because most of the work's already done for you. All right.
Hallelujah.
All right. No perpetual debt. This is our basic overriding principle. Okay? And so the very first thing right out the gate in the Book of the Covenant. Now remember, where are we in the story? Freed from slavery. Hey, do you guys want to be my representatives? All right, well, if you're going to represent me, here's what I care about. I'm going to start with some big picture stuff like don't have other gods before me. And I'm going to kick off the specifics by saying we're not going to have perpetual debt as part of our society. Anyone had student loans for more than 6 years?
My wife.
So this was,
She's gonna watch this video.
it's that kind of thing that this is attempting to address. Make sense?
Yes.
Now, let's pause for a moment. How different a part of God do you get when you realize what we're actually looking at, as opposed to how it sounds on the surface?
Yeah.
Okay?
Say it again.
Yeah. Ditto.
Oh, that's a good one. Times two.
All right? All right, let's look at variation number 1. Okay? Variation number 1. If he comes alone, he needs to go free alone. Ooh. Oh, I got an idea. All right. Here's what we need to do. I don't know if it'll work yet. I'll put it off for a minute. We need to do a little more. I'm gonna make you guys work through some stuff. So, so if he comes alone and goes free alone, let's read on to get what some options other than alone might be. All right. But if he has a wife when he comes, she goes with him. Right. So what's the principle there?
Honor marriage.
You can't take his wife as part of the indebtedness.
Hmm.
That they're both debt free.
What?
That they're both debt free.
The way
That they
this-
Lots of
the way this
lines.
says it-
Volunteered.
the way this says it,
I
it
just,
says-
he just made me
it says,
I'm definitely right.
If he was married before he became a slave, then his wife must be free too. So does that mean that she becomes a slave as well?
It means, did she come along with him or not?
Willingly, maybe?
Okay, guys, this is where it gets. Let me introduce you to one of the preeminent principles of attempting to understand Torah. You should default to economics. So, you're going to see words like slavery, and you're gonna see words, you're gonna see all kinds of family stuff, right? Married, you'll see a lot of sexual stuff. Your tendency, I don't know why, but your tendency is gonna be go to sex. And instead of defaulting to sexual issues, you should default to economic issues. Okay? Let me give you one quick example. It's a little bit of a tangent, but it's appropriate to make the point. In Deuteronomy 22, there's a law about if a woman gets raped, she has to marry the guy who raped her. And he's not allowed to divorce her. Is that about sex?
About taking care of her.
It's about her economic provision. Now, there's, don't go there. That's too far. Okay? It's too far, but it's
You're right.
normal for us to think like that. It is a mistake. Sorry to pick on you.
No, you're all right.
Put
Put it back on him.
I'm going to pretend he said it.
We'll talk
That's
about
what
it.
I was going
We'll
to
talk
say.
about it on the way home.
This is a total tangent. I can't go too far down this road, or we'll never get anywhere in this class. But it is one of the I'm not saying you were doing this, so it just what you said reminded me of something else. All right.
All right.
So it is a very common and absolute. It's just a horrible, horrible mistake to assume that we overinflate the. I gotta be really careful how I say this. In ancient Near Eastern, real family clan base, patriarchal stuff like is the norm in the ancient Near East. I don't want to say that when it comes to marriage issues that virginity is like worthless, because that would be going too far, right? Because you have things like the Joseph story. I don't mean Joseph in Genesis, I mean Mary and Joseph, right? And Joseph's like, oh, we're betrothed and you're pregnant. I don't know, what the, something went wrong. Right? So I'm not trying to present an image that but we fixate on virginity. You're fixating on the wrong thing. Okay? To get pregnant when you're betrothed, that's an affair. All right? And an affair is a thing. And an affair is a different thing than are you a virgin or not. We ascribe an inordinate amount of importance to virginity in terms of, is a woman worth something? I don't know why we do that. There's something about the way Torah reads that we walk away with this, like, if you're not a virgin, you're treated as just absolute scum of the earth in ancient Israel. And it's that's the norm. And I'm just throwing it out there that the norm is too far. Okay? So anyway, that's an aside. We're gonna set that aside. You can harass me in the hallway if you want. But the thing I was starting to get at when I referenced the rape thing, it's translated rape. That's a bad translation. I'm really sorry. I hate to be the guy who does this and just completely undermine like your confidence. Can I read anything? It's not what I'm trying to do, right? Like, there's one word here in Exodus 21. There's one word where there's an issue in Deuteronomy. Like, you can read your Bibles, all right? But in Deuteronomy 22, it often gets translated if a guy rapes a girl. And the Hebrew word is seduce, okay? If the guy seduces her. So you need to picture an image where the guy has been like seducing her. Oh, you know, I don't know what that looks like, but like, you know, making promises. Yeah, we're together. You're the one, right? He seduces her. Okay? And do you see why they would use a word that can also be translated rape for that?
That's a trigger.
Okay? So my point is that this isn't an issue where, oh, your English translations just suck. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is there's a Hebrew word where in their conception, in their viewpoint, to seduce a girl, to make all the kinds of promises, I'm with you, you're mine, and blah, 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 and get her into bed with you, we're going to go ahead and call that rape. Okay? Do you get what I'm saying? That's a different thing than, oh, somebody like met you in a back alley and was violent with you. Okay? Hebrew can use the same word for those extremes. But in English, they paint very, very different pictures, right? And so we read Deuteronomy 22, and we're like, oh, if this violent thing happened. And that's not what it's saying. Okay? It's saying, you seduce the girl, you make promises or whatever. Guess what, buddy? The way it's phrased in Torah, you have to marry her, you can never divorce her, etc. The thing I'm trying to train you to is think economics. What it's saying is, if you seduce a girl, you better be prepared to pay for her ability to live for the rest of her life.
Child support.
It's way beyond that.
But like many years.
Way beyond that. Okay? It's way beyond that. The thing, do you see how in that example, I don't even remember why I got on this example, but do you see how, as in our town, we read that and we're like, the Bible is cruel to women. Why? Because some dude can just rape you and then you have to marry him and you're stuck with him the rest of your life. Let's put it into their town for a moment. Their town. If you're going to make all kinds of promises and seduce a girl, you're going to fund her living experiences the rest of her life, no matter what she does. Woo. You do not, she is not obligated to marry you. That's not what the law says. The law says he must marry her. She can reject that. That's the stuff that we don't understand because we don't have a grid for their town when it comes to law. Okay? It's looking at the responsibility of the man. It's not putting any bounds on the woman having to go along with it. Okay? And this is how I got on this. Default to economics. Right? Because we read in the English translation, if a guy rapes a girl, he has to marry her. And our brains immediately go, oh, she has to marry him. It's not what it said. And default to economics. Okay? If you seduce a girl with all kinds of promises about how she's the one and you're going to marry her and all this kind of stuff, and you seduce her, you treat her as though you're marrying her. Okay? You seduce a girl, you have to provide her, I don't know how to say it without sounding, without it sounding weird, right? But what I'm trying to say is, you're paying all of her expenses the rest of her life. Here's the right way to say it. If you seduce a girl, you are obligated to guarantee her living expenses for forever.
Is that kind of like, are they saying basically like, if you make the promise, like, you better be prepared to follow on it, or, you know, to.
Maybe. The only reason I say maybe is I'm the one who's standing up here phrasing it. If you make all kinds of promises, he didn't have to make a promise. He seduced the girl. However he did it, he seduced her. You seduce a girl, you are providing her living expenses for the rest of her life. Now, what? Go kind of a level deeper than that. Okay. If you do you, let me just say it this way, because we're going to be stuck on this one for forever. It's not even the one that we're supposed to be looking at. Okay. What it's addressing, okay, is when you seduce or rape the woman, you are creating vulnerability.
Right.
You get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And so what Scripture is trying to do is say there's an economic vulnerability here that you're creating, and therefore you have to fix it. Okay? There's other stuff it can't fix. Right? Like you know what I mean? Like it can't say, hey, sorry, young girl, you got seduced. Here's the magic formula that'll just erase the trauma of that. It can't do that. But it can at least remove the economic vulnerability. Okay? So there's two things that I'm using that as an example of. One, default to economics. Because very, very often what we read as sex issues, virginity issues, servanthood issues, et cetera, what's driving the expressions is economics. Okay? And then what's driving the concern for economics is vulnerability. All right? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Would you call vulnerability a preeminent principle, like you did the economic thing?
I would declare it a principle of Torah as a whole, that the surefire way to get God on your bad side is take advantage of the vulnerable for your own benefit. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right? All right, so back to the slave law, right? So we're doing this debt servitude, debt slavery thing. All right, we're trying to put it into their town and get a feel for what that looks like. It looks like what in the United States we would call getting a job. All right, and now we have this and we're saying, hey, we're not going to have perpetual debt, right? We're gonna create a mechanism where the economic vulnerability can be relieved. You know what I'm saying? Okay. Variation number one: if he comes alone, he goes alone. If he doesn't, if he came with a wife, he leaves with a wife. Okay. What does that mean economically?
They had a large debt, and both of them needed to get jobs.
Maybe. That's if he came with a wife.
Yeah.
What if he came alone?
He's just paying for his own debt.
Yeah. Right.
You can't drag someone else's life into an economic balance.
But
It's someone else's. So like, you know, your life can be used to pay for your debts, but you can't force other people to have, you know, other people's lives aren't going to be used as collateral for your debt.
but the second variation is if he came with a wife.
He's promised to take care of her. He's promised to
So you
provide
can't
for
just
her,
leave
so.
her and go into slavery.
Guys, y'all, this is fun to watch.
Peaceful.
Yeah, D-school, all right? Let's
Right,
D-school
take
it.
down some notches.
Press the easy button.
Guys, economics. Okay, if one person needed to get a job, then one person will leave the job. If two people got a job, then two people will leave the job. It's as simple as that.
I thought we had said that already.
I missed it,
Okay.
for which I apologize.
So single wouldn't necessarily imply that he is like single relationship wise, like he could still have a wife, but his wife didn't have to come to fill whatever this debt was. He just left his wife to come fill the debt.
Let me just double check real quick. Yeah, it just says it became a loan.
I'm just asking, like, is that what you mean when you say, like, it became as a single person, like, it
Doesn't
didn't
have to be
necessarily
single
mean
or
he wasn't
married.
married.
Single married is, he came alone.
Okay,
Maybe he's a married dude, but he came alone.
right.
Doesn't matter,
Okay.
okay? What's that?
That's
Sorry.
kind of what I was saying.
Yeah.
He was married, but he left her and went on the slavery himself.
Yeah. Good. Now, real quick, again, since it's D-school. Y'all, a town of 12,000 is ginormous, okay? Ginormous. So if he comes alone, are we splitting up marriages?
No, 'cause they probably still go home at night.
Yes, yes, okay? This is not, we're not splitting up marriages. We're not, this is, 12,000 is ginormous, all right? You can walk to work every day. You know, you can relocate. Now, I'm not trying to say that there was never ever a family where, you know, it was like, all right, honey, I'm gonna go to the town next over for the next 6 months, and I'll only see you on the weekends. I'm not saying that it never happened. I'm just saying that that's not, our brains default to, wow, we're just splitting up marriages and we're doing all this crazy stuff. None of that is going on in this. It's pure economics. Pure economics. You fell on hard times, you gotta get a job. All right? If you go work that job alone, we're not gonna have it be a forever thing. Right? So let's say you fell on just the hardest times ever to where you have 6 years worth of debt. You have 12 years worth of debt. We're not doing the you're forever indebted thing. Whatever that might look like, right? We're gonna make sure that the economic vulnerabilities of being in an agrarian society have a mechanism for being taken care of. Okay, so you're gonna go work, preferably for your kin. We're not gonna have perpetual debt, okay? And you can't like add or the boss can't add obligations halfway through. So if the guy comes alone, he's gonna leave alone. If the guy came with his wife, and then you know, and they're doing their jobs, so to speak, they're gonna leave together. It's pure economics. All right? Make sense? We're trying to alleviate economic vulnerability created in an agrarian society through things like what it is to be a farmer or a herdsman or whatever, right? Stuff happens. If you don't believe me, watch the Jeremy Clarkson farming show. It's hilarious, and stuff happens all the time. All right, so next variation, maybe it'll be easier if we get the next variation because you can see a contrast to verse 3. Verse 4, okay, if the master provides a wife, this we should have started with this one because it would have made the point a little more easily. If the master provides a wife and she bears sons or daughters, the woman and her children belong to the master, but the dude leaves. I can't tell you the number of times. It's absolutely hilarious. Like, people are like, I thought God loved families, and you're just splitting up families. Anyway, it's just, 12,000 is ginormous, all right? The norm is way smaller than that. We're not splitting up families, okay? The family is intact, all right? So what does it mean that the, verse 4, what does it mean? Think economics, yeah.
Does it mean that if he puts him in charge or gives him helpers, that the helpers stay with the master because they belong there and don't go with him?
Yeah, I mean, it's well, I see how you got there, but it's think about marriage customs. All right, here we're gonna remember we're viewing this as an expression of a principle, and we got to make sure that we understand some their town stuff. How does marriage work? Do you go dating? You go hit the roller range when you're in middle school, and you get sweaty hands when you hold hands on the slow song, and and then eventually you're like, wow, I'm gonna marry my high school sweetheart. And how does marriage work?
Arranged.
It's arranged.
And there's a dowry.
And there's a dowry.
What?
Bride price and stuff. Okay? So, if it says, if the master provides a wife, what does that mean? It paid. Paid the dowry. Paid the bride price. Okay? It's economics. All right? So, think of the scenario, right? Let's just put numbers on it, all right? Just because it's easier to visualize, okay? Let's say that I have $10,000 worth of debt. And I say, well, crap, I got to get a job, okay? So I go and I get a job, and our arrangement is, I should have used modern numbers instead of like numbers from the 1920s. But anyway, let's pretend that here's our arrangement. $2,000 per year for 5 years, right? Okay. No interest, and by the way, you're only working off $2,000 a year, but along the way I'm paying for your expenses, right? Your living expenses. So it's $2,000 a year plus living expenses for 5 years to pay out whatever. I'm just making this up, okay? All right, so you go and you start working, and your deal is I'm making $2,000 a year to pay off the debt. So then you're a young man and you're like, oh man, I want to get married. Can you help me get a marriage? And the guy's like, the master was like, yeah, absolutely. I'd love to help you get a marriage. And the bride price, the dowry is gonna be, $650,000, right? I'm trying. Anyway, yeah. Anyway, so whatever it is, right? Again, they don't have currency, so it's all it all looks kind of different, but you get the concept, right? Let's say that the dowry, hey, we're gonna pay $5,000 for the wedding. Okay?
That's a cheap wedding.
I know, but we have boys, and that's all I'm doing. So, anyway, so my point is, here was the original deal. Well, I'm happy to help arrange the marriage for you. Okay, and that as the master, that's going to cost me another $5,000. So what is Torah saying?
So is that $5,000 her debt then? Coming into it? If she agrees to that arranged marriage?
It'll be like eventually, right?
Kind of. It's his. Okay? So what's it saying? First off, read the law, verse 4. Okay? So they came in under a deal for $10,000 to be paid off, over 5 years. But now we're adding $5,000 to his indebtedness. because the master is paying the bride price.
So does the indenture
The
just
dowry.
go longer? It's a separate contract, so.
What does it say? Does the guy stay indentured longer?
No.
No? What's it say?
Or she
Well,
wants
her
the
and the children have to stay.
There you go. What does stay mean? Let's get into their town.
keep the
Get in the
job.
job.
Yeah, they keep the job. They continue the regular stuff that you do to maintain a household, and they're doing it over at the master's place.
He's provided for.
It's pure economics, okay? So here's what it's saying. Look, you made a deal, all right? We're not gonna have it go past 6 years, because we don't want perpetual debt. Okay? Now, we don't wanna have perpetual debt. It's not gonna go more than 6 years, but let's say that you have a scenario that fits within that. It's either, it's a 6-year cap no matter what. Maybe it's only a 5-year deal, maybe it's a 3-year deal, doesn't matter. You've worked it out, okay? If the dude goes and gets a job on his own, then when it's time for him to leave, whether it's because the 6 years are up or because the debt's been paid, the dude leaves. If he got a job alone, he leaves alone. If him and his wife came and got the job, then they leave together. Why? Because it's all part of the original deal. Now, if along the way, because 6 years can be a long time, especially if you're a young person trying to get off the ground or whatever, you know. And so now along the way, you work this deal with your boss, who's, again, you're probably related. It would make sense that it's very, very possible that the person you're working for is in fact like your guardian or really, really close to it, right? And so you're saying to this person, I want to get married. And that person says, all right, I'll help you get married. And in doing so, incurs expenses. What it's saying is those expenses, the separate expenses for the marriage, stay on the books. So after 6 years, we're wiping out this thing, but you don't get to wipe this one out along with it.
No fringe benefits.
All right, now, let me ask you a question. If we're in a scenario where I'm in debt and I work out with someone, you know, the deal, right? I go get the job with some relative that's going to allow me to be provided for, and we work out the deal. It's time for me to go free. You know, let's just say I'm just in horrible circumstances, and it's just, you know, in reality it'd be way more than 6 years, but we're actually going to do Torah. We're not going to have perpetual debt. 6 years have you know, have done the thing, right? And so I get to leave without either paying anything or without compensation, however you understand verse 2. So, but along the way, my master, my guardian, whatever term you want to use, funded my marriage.
Mm-hmm.
I owe him for that marriage. You see that? You see what I'm saying? I owe him for that. I don't get to say, hey, sorry, buddy, but 6 years and I get to go. It's pure economics. It's not about splitting up families or anything. It's about you went in to indentured servitude, you added to the debt. You don't get to just sit there and add to the debt under the assumption that it's all going to get lumped under the original thing. Now, if I'm the broke guy who goes to work for a relative, and then along the way I start saying, hey, could you buy me a new plow? Hey, would you be willing to, you know, buy me a few sheep so I can get started? Hey, would you help arrange a marriage for me? And then at the end of 6 years, I get to go, hey, thanks for all that extra stuff along the way. I'm out of here. Who's vulnerable in that scenario?
Master.
The master.
Vulnerability.
This is one of the just most amazingly stunning things about Torah. it'll take a scenario where you assume who the vulnerable party is going to be, and it'll start there, but then it'll shift the camera lens, and it'll recognize that the ones who would ordinarily not be thought of as vulnerable, in this case the economically secure, can still be put into a vulnerable scenario.
That's crazy.
There's a guy I know who, he told me a story about somebody from his church actually came over to his house. This isn't here, so you don't have to try and figure out who it was here. It was not in Omaha. But he told me the story of a young person from his church came over to his house and said, just knocked on the door, right, random. The Lord has been calling me to go to ministry school, and the Lord told me that you're to pay for it. So, and the guy's well-to-do, right? And it was hilarious listening to him tell the story. He was like, I was so dumbfounded. This guy's just like, the Lord told me that you're paying for my college. And I just looked at him and said, the Lord hasn't told me that yet. Yeah. But do you see how this young person, if from an economic perspective, the poor young person we would have all just assumed is the vulnerable one. But that scenario put the wealthy person into the vulnerable situation. Mm-hmm. And Torah is acknowledging that that's a real thing. Mm-hmm. You cannot just look at someone who's wealthy and say they can never be the vulnerable because they're wealthy. Torah defies that idea. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right, so shifting the camera lens, okay? I thought we'd get a lot further than this. That's okay. How are we doing so far?
Good.
It's just hard to grasp, like, what we're, or put aside, like, what we're so used to,
Yep.
like, defining law as law.
Yep.
And, like, changing that mindset to, like, understand it this way. But it makes sense, it's just hard to shift it.
Yes. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
Was it common back then, when somebody would fulfill their debt, that they would want to stay in that position?
Oh, well, I don't know how common it is, but I do know that there's a law that says if the servant declares, I love my master and my wife and my children, and I don't want to go free, then make it legal. That's what it says after that. Take him to the judge, do the little ritual. That's just all lingo for make it legal.
I use it all the time. I could imagine it going through my ear.
Yeah, well, it kind of, you gotta want it at that point. But to answer your question, how common? I don't know how common any of this was. You know, you read the Old Testament, and you basically have no evidence that Torah was ever kept. With there are a couple exceptions, but they're exceptions. You know, like the story of Ruth, when Boaz really acts in the way Torah would want. That's radically abnormal, and that's part of the story, by the way. That this is the period of the Judges, right? Ruth opens within the period of the Judges, which is lingo for when no one gave a crap about Torah whatsoever. There was this guy who did Torah. This is amazing, right? That's what it is, and then it's showing you the blessing of the blessing to yourself, the blessing to the people around you, the blessing to the community when you keep Torah. So anyway, how common was anything? I don't have a clue. Apparently not very. But then, you know, you went to the next variation, right? So first we have the variation of coming alone, going alone, coming not alone, going not alone, with then the added variation of that variation about, okay, what if the master arranges the marriage We can't just roll that debt into the original debt and pretend there was an additional debt. We have to take care of the new debt in a separate way. And again, they can work that out, right? It's just that the servant isn't allowed to presume, okay? The law does not say, by the way, that the master can't go ahead and just let him go. It's not what it's saying. Okay? What it's saying is the poor person can't put the rich person into a vulnerable situation by assuming that, well, because you're rich and the Lord has blessed you so much, you have to do whatever. Yeah.
Can you talk about, why is economics such a big deal? Like, do you have an opinion about that? About Torah being so based on economics and money and that kind of thing?
Because it is the preeminent path to vulnerability.
Mm. Mm.
You know.
Makes sense.
I don't know. I feel like I didn't answer your question, but that's the answer to the question. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Do I need to? All right. Okay. So, but it's not all economics, though, right? I mean, but especially if you read a law and you start thinking to yourself, this is about sex. Pause, say to yourself, probably this is about economics. Let me look and see what the economic implications are. Okay? That's, by the way, that's law, not ritual. Okay? In other words, that's not Leviticus. I'm talking about Exodus and Deuteronomy. Okay? All right. So we have this scenario where the dude gets in debt, and we're not going to have perpetual debt, and we're going to keep the economics straight of the arrangement, right? So if he came alone, the master can't put extra burden on him. But if the master provided more financial stuff along the way, then that has to be treated separately than the original debt. But you could have a scenario where someone might say, hey, can I just work for you? Because this works. It's good for you. It's good for me. I don't want to go take on the risk of my own whatever stuff again. That's gone poorly for me. Maybe my skills are different, or whatever. Can we work something out? Yeah, you can. You can. That's verses 5 and 6. All right. So again, it's by the way, that's part of how I know. You remember when I said, just because it says if I work for 6, I go free in 7, and I said it doesn't mean that the arrangement has to be 6 years. Right? How do I know that kind of thing? It's because you consistently see variations like this. You could look at work for 6 and in the 7th go free and say you have to go free in the 7th. There's just no other way. That's what it says. That's the Bible. Let's be biblical. It says I got to go free in the 7th. No, you can make a different arrangement, but you have to adhere to the principle. And the principle is we're not going to have perpetual debt. If you want to set up a perpetual arrangement where the economic vulnerability is removed on all sides, right? The dude wants to hire you and you want to work for him. Why not? Get her done. All right? Make sense? Yeah. Okay. Next one. This one just confuses people. All right. So let me just tell you up front. It's way more fun to watch you guys just wrestle with it. But again, we don't have the 14 hours over 7 weeks that I take with the seminary students. All right. If a man sells his daughter, the arrangement's going to be different.
Bless you.
Thank you.
Okay. First off, let's just read it to try and get a feel for it, and then I'm going to ask some their town questions. If a man sells his daughter as a servant, she's not to go free as male servants do. If she does not please the master who has selected her for himself, he must let her be redeemed. He has no right to sell her to foreigners because he has broken faith with her. If he selects her for his son, he must grant her the rights of a daughter. If he marries another woman, he must not deprive the first one of provision. And if he, I have to read that because there's an issue. The first one of her food, clothing, and marital rights. If he does not provide her with these three things, she goes free. All right. Here's Bible splitting up marriages again. All right. Let me just, for the sake of time, help you navigate this. First off, their town. What does sell a daughter mean? If a man sells his daughter as a servant,
Gets her a job?
kind of. Kind of, but if you read the rest, what's he actually setting up?
Putting her up for
He's setting up a marriage. Okay? What he's doing is he's saying, yeah, we can arrange a marriage, and instead of you paying me a dowry, you're going to cancel debt. Okay? So it's basically like, go back to this example I was using. I have $10,000 worth of debt, but I'll arrange the marriage and we'll reduce the dowry by $10,000 to just wipe out the debt. That's all it is, folks. All it is. Okay? This isn't, I hate my daughter. I'm selfish. I was going to use a word, and I'm just like selling her into slavery. This is not what the Bible is like saying, yeah, go do that. All right? This is, you're arranging a marriage for your daughter, and you're canceling debt as part of the dowry. Okay? Now, let's say you do that. Well, then we have, if she does not please the master, that sounds like we're going anti-woman again. Here we go. Bible's going anti-woman. Oh, but we better read on. He can't sell her. You see what's going on?
Someone has responsibility.
Yeah. He doesn't get to demand a refund, right? He's assuming the economic responsibility, and we're setting up things where you have a woman who is in a potentially seriously economically vulnerable situation, and we're saying the economics will be taken care of. Okay, now how is it going to be taken care of? Well, one option, okay, is you can let her be redeemed. Okay, you can under mutual agreement just call the whole thing off. That's one option. Hey, we set this thing up, we're going to do it. Somebody balks on the deal, okay, you have the option to call the whole thing off. Or, all right, well, what he can't do is be like, all right, got myself a new fiance, I think I could get more on the foreign market. Okay? You hear how like horrible that would be? And yes, it's saying you can't do that. All right? He does not somehow get the right. Do you see this? Do you see the scenario? He entered the marriage contract. He decides, I don't like you. he doesn't get to then do whatever he wants. So he entered into the contract. He doesn't have the right to then, my point is, look at what it says. He's the one who broke faith with her. Okay? So he enters into the contract. He doesn't like the girl for whatever reason. He doesn't get to go, it's all her fault. No, guys. He's the one who screwed this up. Okay? The reason I'm hammering this is because Torah is aware of the fact that that it's very easy for a woman of marriageable age to be put into a vulnerable situation. And so what it's saying, in terms of a principle, is you don't get to just go throw her under the bus. Right? The I is the potential vulnerability of the young woman. Okay? And we're not going to allow a scenario where she gets to carry the brunt of the blame. She doesn't get to be accused for bringing it on herself. Did you?
I kind of answered it, now I'm good.
All right.
Thanks. Well,
All right.
go on.
So he's the one who broke faith with her. Okay. Now, if we're in a different situation, that's verse 9. If he selects her for his son, right? So it's not, hey, I'm working on a marriage. I'm arranging a marriage, and the marriage is for myself, right? And now we're shifting gears. You're arranging the marriage for your son, okay? So, you know, I'm Eric, and I have, you know, this friend Bob, relative Bob, whatever, distant relative, whatever it is, clan member, Bob's in debt. So we start working it out, and it's like, well, I'll pay off your debt as the dowry for your daughter to marry my son. This is the scenario we're in now. Make sense? Okay? So that's what it means when it says if he selects her for his son. Okay? Look at the next thing. He must grant her the rights of a daughter. What is that?
Financially, wouldn't that be a place in the will? If you want to go that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say in the will. I would say you get to partake in the inheritance that of my son, that you're marrying. But, guys,
You live in his house.
it's saying you don't get to treat a woman as a second-class citizen just because her dad was in debt. Okay? Again, it's recognizing a high potential for vulnerability. Oh, this is the woman who came into the family from the poor family. You don't get to do that. She must be treated, you know, as a daughter. You get what I'm saying?
Yes.
All right. If he marries another woman, okay, in other words, you should not assume they're dealing with wholly monogamous societies. Okay, so if the son has this one marriage and then he takes on another marriage, okay, he doesn't get to then treat the wife who came in through the indebtedness, he doesn't get to treat her again as like the second class. Okay, does that make sense? I do need to mention this because it'll be confusing. If he marries another woman, he must not deprive the first one of her food. Well, you know what that is. Of her clothing. You know what that is. Can he deny her like her shoes? I mean, you know, it just says clothing. I don't have to roll shoes into that. Can he deny her beverage? I mean, it just says food.
Just basic needs.
Yeah, right. Again, do you hear how my questions are statutory law questions? All right, you should just immediately be going, what are you doing? That's stupid. Okay, all right. So food, clothing, and marital rights. What is that? And don't say sex.
My version says conjugal rights.
Yeah, marriage rights. Yeah, conjugal rights, which in English just means sex. What is it?
Inheritance.
What does that mean? How? How does inheritance work?
He's still supposed to be treating her like a daughter economically.
It's now we're on the son. If he, the son, marries another woman, the son, or I guess the father too, but the son must not deprive the first one of food, clothing, and marital rights.
Oh, he's still supposed to pay for it.
Yes, that's the food and clothing. What?
If she has kids or kids matter, they're still in the line
Okay.
of succession or
All
whatever
right.
you wanna call it.
Look, guys, here's the deal. Marital rights is in fact sex. Okay? But why is it not about sex?
Kids.
Okay, what about kids? Who cares? We just like having kids?
No, kids
Women
are-
like kids. We can't deny that.
Kids work.
You're on the right track. Okay? Look, here's the deal. Guys, it's economics. You've got to default to economics. All right? Which some of you are doing. I realize. Yeah, right. So what it's saying, yes, marital rights means sex, but it's not about sex. Okay? It's about you're in an agrarian, family-based society. It's about not setting her up to be a widow, which is an economically vulnerable situation. You're setting her up to be a part of the ongoing family. This is about ensuring that her lifetime of financial provision is taken care of. Okay? You get what I'm saying?
Yes.
All right. So it means sex, but it's not about sex. Make sense? All right. She can walk. Try that one on in your local church. Anyway, I shouldn't go there. But it is in fact what it says. If the dude is failing to financially provide, she can walk. All right? Thanks for sticking around, baby. That's like what every guy in the room is thinking. All right. That's slave law.
Thinking that's one less thing I gotta pay for.
How you guys?
Just kidding.
You're on camera, Kevin.
I'll let you know. Kevin's like, you don't need to watch it, I'll just give you the summary.
Martha would be here.
She would be laughing.
Oh my God.
I was just kidding.
All right. Okay. We by the way, we're still gonna on Wednesday. We're meeting on Wednesday, right?
Yep.
Yes.
We're still gonna do some more here. Okay. We're gonna keep going. So I really encourage you for Wednesday to just give a read of the rest of chapter 21. Okay? And just start to think, I wonder what a principle of this one might be. I wonder what a principle of that one might be. Whatever. Just we're gonna continue on Wednesday to work through chapter 21. Make sense?
Yeah.
All right. It's going to be good. And I'll just warn you up things on this little handout. The main thing that I want to get, that we should be able to get through before noon, is the common misconceptions. But let's start at the top super quick. A couple of obstacles when it comes. Okay, first off, when I talk about Old Testament law on this, and as it pertains to this handout, I am talking specifically about legal stuff in the Bible, but also Leviticus. All right? So Leviticus is a different literary genre, but it's a very similar literary genre. That's a different topic for a different day. All I'm trying to say is this handout is, I'm using the word law the way the church normally uses the law, right? Those Old Testament rules that none of us care about. Okay, that's what we're talking about. So there's two big obstacles, two giant hurdles that get in the way of our approach to Old Testament law. I actually just said the second one when I said, oh, all those weird rules that none of us read anyway. That's actually number 2 there. Okay, innate Marcionism. Marcion was an early church father, so Marcionism is named after a person who taught that you just reject the Old Testament altogether. So since very, very early in the church, there has been a tendency to just, the Old Testament is utterly irrelevant. And, okay, someone's missing.
Run.
Okay, so then,
I was like, I'm not fired for a while.
I always pray for the person when I get one of these. Okay, point number 1 is kind of the opposite extreme where, well, I'll just read it. Since the beginning of the church, the common tendency has been to see faith as the dynamic of salvation, and then works, that is, doing the law, as the dynamic of sanctification. Salvation is the way the words are being used here, which again is kind of how the church often uses them. Not necessarily, anyway. But salvation is like, oh yay, I get to go to heaven. And sanctification is becoming more mature in your faith, more Christ-like over time or whatever. So one of the kind of giant ways in which the church has just kind of had in the background is like, okay, well, I'm saved by faith. Yeah. But, I got to do my work so I can be sanctified. That's an obstacle to approaching the law correctly. Another obstacle is, Old Testament law, that's just dumb. We're Christians. Okay? Now, if you think this stuff isn't prevalent, by the way, okay, option number 1 that I just said is like super normal in evangelical churches across the board. Option number 2 is what is directly taught by Andy Stanley, which is a really, really ginormous and extraordinarily influential church. Okay, so these things are, I'm not like saying, here's some really weird fringe stuff. I'm saying, no, this is like normal currents that get in the way of being able to get anything decent out of Old Testament law. Okay, so that's point number 1. Point number 2, a few main ideas of this giant handout as a whole. Number 1, the law is good. The law is not some bad thing. The law is not this horrible legalistic rule-based thing that, thank you Jesus, you saved us from the law. Okay? The law is good. Hopefully, by the way, you started to see that in the way we looked at the law. Okay? The law is good. All right. Second, the weakness of the law and the power of the Spirit. That's actually lingo I stole from a professor. This is more his thought than mine. The law was never designed to get people into heaven. True. Nor did it have the power to motivate right living. True. The law was to mark Yahweh's people as his own, right? They're his special treasure. It's that stuff that we looked at. Okay? So the law in the first place was just designed for, hey, here's God's heart, here's how you can rep it. Because remember, the deal was to be his representative. Okay? So you're going to be my representative? Here's how you can do it. Okay? So what it means by the weakness of the law was never meant to be something that is going to somehow miraculously work obedience in you or something like that. Okay? That's what God does. Which Paul says directly in Philippians, for it is God who works in us to will and to act according to his good purposes. It's God who works in us to even want to in the first place, and then to actually be able to pull it off. That's pretty awesome. Number 3, the unity of the law, which that chapter in the book talked about this a little bit. We need to work out the fact that it is the entire law that is to be written on the heart of the new covenant. The law talked, I think I have it later in the handout, I don't remember. But this whole like civil, ceremonial, ethical, I don't know if any of you have ever heard that stuff. The book talks about it. It's not a biblical distinction. Also notice, back on this unity of the law thing, also notice the unity of Old Testament and New Testament law. The whole law applies to the Christian in the same way. Pause. The whole law, including the Old Testament, applies. All right? I'm probably one of the only people you will ever talk to who will say that to you. Who isn't crazy, hopefully. The whole law still applies. Okay? We'll talk about how. All right, so let's get to some misconceptions. Okay, real quick, before we get to the common misconceptions. This thing about the unity of the law, your textbook talks about this. In a lot of old school circles, especially Baptist circles, for whatever reason, it's really normal to talk about civil, ceremonial, and ethical laws. And basically what they're doing, what's driving this, is they're saying, what still applies? Well, don't murder. It probably still applies. All right? So that's an ethical law. When you take your goat out to kill it as a sacrifice, that's ceremonial law. Doesn't apply. Stuff about slaves, that's civil law. Doesn't apply. Right? So this is where this came from, is people reading the Old Testament from a very statutory perspective and trying to say what still applies and what doesn't. Well, let's pull out the ethical things and we'll give a check to those, but this crap was for ancient Israel. All right? Now, it's well-meaning, but like Scripture itself never makes this distinction, which is what your textbook talks about. So,
what is the distinction titled as? Those 3 things, what is it titled as?
I have no idea. Just those 3 things.
It's chapter 19?
Yeah.
It's in chapter 19.
Yeah, I can't remember what stuff.
Okay. So, all right. So the law is unified. All right. The law is a thing. Don't go down the civil, ceremonial, whatever. Bible doesn't make that distinction. The law is unified. Which, by the way, if you can see it as common law, that becomes intuitive. Okay. It's viewing it as statutory law that gets everyone messed up. All right. Some very common misconceptions, and I'm sorry if I burst some bubbles. First, God never expected anyone to keep the law. Right? Because what's the normal thing? Oh, God knew we couldn't keep the law, and He gave the law so that we could see that we suck, so that we'll need a Savior. Right? This is a super common approach to the law. It's not biblical. And how do we know that? Deuteronomy 30. This is after all the law has been given. Deuteronomy 30, verse 11. Oh, I even have an arrow in it. Oh. All right. I even have an arrow next to it in my Bible, which I don't write in my Bible all the time. I don't use the English a lot. Now that I am commanding, now, what I am commanding you today is not too difficult for you or beyond your reach. It is not up in heaven, so that you have to ask, who will ascend into heaven to get it and proclaim it to us, so we may obey it? Nor is it beyond the sea, so that you have to ask, who will cross the sea and get it and proclaim it to us, so that we may obey it? No, the word is very near you. It's in your mouth and it's in your heart. Y'all can do it. All right? So you got to let go of the law was given so that we would know how crummy we are, which is a misinterpretation largely of that Romans verse that's listed. All right, number 2. By the way, we have like not a ton of time, so I'm kind of speeding through, but holler at me if you're like, whoa, wait a second, just feel free to interrupt. All right, number 2. No one can keep the law. This one really throws people off. All right, look at Luke chapter 1. I like the Philippians one too, but Luke chapter 1. People read it and they're like, what? That's in there? You gotta be kidding me. Luke chapter 1, verse 5. Dun, dun, dun. In the time of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah who belonged to the priestly division of Abiah. His wife, Liz, was also a descendant of Aaron. Both of them were righteous in the sight of God, observing all the Lord's commands and decrees blamelessly. All right, so scratch that one. Number 3. Paul does this too, right? Paul's whole in Philippians 3. He's like, y'all, people are talking about how like awesome you are because of whatever religious thing. Y'all need to back up because I am a Hebrew of Hebrews. I'm of the tribe of Benjamin. And he goes through this list, right? In regards to the law, I'm a Pharisee. As for legalistic righteousness, faultless. And then he goes on to say, but that's all kind of crap in light of knowing the Lord. Yeah.
So just like, I can just hear like my dad just revolting at all of this, and all I can hear is his response of like, well, no one lived a perfect life, and like, how do you like differentiate like living a perfect life like Jesus lived a perfect life versus like being considered blameless and like fulfilling these laws and stuff? Like how would you differentiate those? Or do you like?
I think it's a good question. I'm gonna charge on because if we get a little more
That's
under our
fine.
belt, it'll be easier to circle back around to that.
Okay.
All right, that is always like a super common question. I will say up front. I don't know what it is about Christians, but we think everything is about getting to heaven or not.
Mm-hmm.
Salvation or not. So, well, we'll get there.
Mm-hmm.
All right, remind me to circle back around to that because I forget stuff. All right, number 3. The Mosaic Treaty in which the law is embedded is all about works. There's no grace in the law. My beloved Lutheran friends and family members are very fond of talking about Old Testament law and New Testament grace. It's embedded in their theology, which goes back to Luther. And a lot of what Luther's doing is reacting to the things that he views as problems with the church of the day, right? And the just the abuses in the church. And so he kind of, in my opinion, threw out the baby with the bathwater a little bit. But there's the law is, the idea that there's not grace in the law, I just don't even know how to wrap my head around that in a way that I could explain it well to you. But anyway, there's some verses there. You're dealing, again, if your whole approach is statutory, I guess I can kind of see how it makes sense, right? You end up like Andy Stanley, who in a very well-meaning and very pastorally way is trying to help people get past the weird stuff in the Old Testament. Like, well, I want to love God, but he allowed slavery. I can't love a God who allowed slavery. So one approach to that, again, out of a very strong pastoral concern, is to say, dude, ditch the Old Testament. That was all crap, right? And the problem is, if you begin to really dig in and understand that like we did today, right? You begin to understand these things that are traditional hurdles, like the slavery stuff, or like the what, you can rape a girl and she has to marry you, which, by the way, is one of the verses he quoted in his sermon and the book. It's like, look at how cruel this stuff is, right? And God moved his people beyond that kind of a thing. But when you begin to realize, no, what it's saying is, you seduce a girl, you are covering her economic vulnerability for the rest of her life. Anyway, so to look at things like, we're not going to have perpetual debt and have six-figure student debt, it's really hard for me to not see grace in the law. Okay? So anyway, it's all over the place. There's a few verses there that are a little more explicit on that if you want to look at them. Number 4, the law is only a set of rules and doesn't call for heart devotion. Oh, jeez. That's just crazy. Let's move on to number 5. Here's one that is in a way true and in a way false. We're free from the law. True, in the sense that the punishment for disobedience, we're free from that. The consequences, right, of not keeping the law, totally free from that. Free from condemnation. But it's not like we just don't have to, it's not like it doesn't apply. So we're free from the law in the sense of the penalty. Jesus took care of that. We are not at all free from the law in the sense of this is God's word. The law still applies. Make sense so far? Yes. Okay. Oh, and that's number 2, right? So number 5, we're free from the law, and then subpoint 2, with the misconception of we are under no obligation to fulfill the standards of the law, but you can look at those verses if you want. The law still applies. All right, number 6. The Old Testament law is not relevant. Oh, jeez. I'm starting to get angry just even reading these things.
You typed them.
Yeah, didn't you write them?
He was like this. It's like, oh, jeez.
All right. Number 7 is a huge one that people were supposed to be saved by keeping the law. Somebody tell me what the purpose of the law is. I've said it like 8 times. And in your answer, mention the book of Exodus. What's the law for? What's its purpose?
Tell us what God cares about.
Yeah. Yes to all of that. To tell us what God cares about. That's what he cares about. Why?
So we can be like him and reflect it.
Yeah, you kind of went Christianese on me. Tie it specifically to Exodus. What?
His treasury, or his,
Yeah, right?
Law and the covenant.
Yeah, but we're Exodus 19. Hey, y'all. You want to be my representatives? You want to be my kingdom of priests, my holy nation, my display treasure? They say yes. And God says, all right, here's how you represent me. That's what the law was for. How on earth do we get saved by keeping the law out of that? You shouldn't. People were not supposed to be saved by keeping the law. This wasn't, hey, here's your path to heaven, let me lay it out for you. If it wasn't that, and the law instead, oh yeah, Amanda?
But there's a massive misconception of either you're saved by Jesus or you're saved by keeping the law 100% and being perfect.
Well, this is a list of common misconceptions. So when you say there's a
But I mean,
massive
that's a
misconception.
huge theology, huge.
Yeah.
Especially here in Omaha.
All right.
I told him on the way here to say that, that
To
this
say
is
what?
not like you're not spouting things necessarily that are common.
I'm giving you some things that are not common knowledge. That is correct. Okay? It's what you pay for. That's why I'm making the big dollars. So, people, hey, how are people saved in Old Testament times?
Following the law.
That's the misconception. That is number 7.
Sacrifice.
That is also number 7.
Being God's people.
By God inviting them into the faith and accepting.
You're getting closer.
Did he already save them though?
Oh yeah, he did save them.
He came to them, right?
I feel like I've stumbled onto
Nobody
something.
saved in the Old Testament until
Right
Jesus
down the
went
road.
to the bellows and carried them.
There you go. They're not safe.
They're not.
They're not saved. They're in that interim place.
Whoa, man.
He tells the right answer though first.
Easy.
I don't want Amanda's false theology in my brain.
It's yours too. Your mother was a good Catholic.
It's yours.
Those Virginians are good Catholics.
Go ahead, honey, say it.
I'm either going to wait until someone comes up with it, or I'm going to say, find it and tell me on Wednesday.
What's the
Because
question?
God's
Repeat it,
good,
repeat it.
just because God's good, you don't have
How are
Hurry
people
up.
saved in Old
Did I
Testament
just say
times?
What is the question again?
How were people saved in Old Testament times?
In old or new?
Old
Old
Testament.
Testament.
New is obvious.
What's the new?
Mm.
Yes. I love questions.
By saying a prayer at the altar.
I say it a prayer at the altar. That's exactly right.
I would say through their belief in the anticipation of the coming Messiah.
What's another word for belief?
Faith,
What's the Bible word that gets batted around that people in real life don't use? Y'all said it. Another word for belief.
Faith.
Okay, faith. So, in New Testament times, you're saved by faith? Is that what you're saying? Would you go so far as to say in New Testament times we are saved by faith through, by grace through faith?
New Testament?
Yeah. Would you say that if I said, how are you saved in New Testament times? Would you be willing to say we're saved by grace through faith?
Yes.
Why are you willing to say that?
Ephesians.
Yeah, who says it? Yes, because Paul says it. Because Paul says it. Now, why does Paul say it?
Because the Old Testament.
Be more specific.
Doesn't he go back to your whole, do you want to be my people? Yes, then this. If yes, then, yeah.
Okay?
References that, right?
What? Yeah, you're getting close to my point. Y'all, come on now. Paul is not telling you something new. He's teaching you what's always been the case.
Faith in God.
We are saved by grace through faith. That is not new with Jesus. It is what Torah teaches. Paul is not writing some new thing. He's reflecting Torah. We are saved by grace through faith. So, I asked, I think it was you, Matt. You asked, wait, Old Testament or New Testament? Somebody did. And everyone erupted, old! And I had to keep my mouth shut, because both is the answer. Both. Guys? We are saved by grace through faith. How are people saved in Old Testament times? They're saved by grace through faith. How are we saved in New Testament times? All right? So, keeping the law has nothing to do with, do I get to go to heaven? It's utterly foreign to anything that's going on. I mean, think about, I'm sorry if I get a little worked up. I want to say up front, Becky, this is, to help me say it correctly. Sometimes when I get worked up like this, it has nothing to do with you. All right? It has to do with the it has to, I get uncharacteristic, it's characteristic for me. I get unusually worked up and disturbed. What's behind it is I see the hurt that is caused by not understanding how God is revealing himself. So when I start talking about this and I just start to get angry, I can't read these 7 misconceptions without getting angry. And I don't necessarily like that about myself, because I think a better response would be to grieve, right? But maybe I'm not all the way there yet. A better response would be to be like Jesus, who saw people without a shepherd and had compassion upon them and began to teach. That's what I try to do. And the reality is, I get really angry a lot, because I see the hurt and the misunderstanding and the misrepresentation of God that's all the way down to the level of the very way we talk about the gospel. Hey, we should share the gospel, and I listen to someone share the gospel, and I think, what? But I don't, and I get really worked up. So I read these misconceptions, I get really worked up. You want to work me up real fast? My youngest son knows how to do this. He just jabs at me. But start talking about how we're saved through the blood of bulls and goats in Old Testament times, which is the exact opposite of what Hebrews talks about. Talk to me about how Jesus saved us from the law. Really? I mean, think about what we have seen in the law up to this point. We should care for the people who are working on our behalf and not dehumanize them. Oh, that law! Thank the Lord, I'm saved from that. Right? I can't help it, and it is the language of the church. If there's anything, it stems back to, aside from just general condition of man, etc. It's well-meaning people trying to make sense of the relationship between the Old Testament and the New Testament, where all the way through they're reading the Old Testament in a statutory way. Okay? And so you end up with, let's divide it up, civil, ceremonial, ethical. You end up with Jesus changed the law. Even though Jesus said, that's not what I'm doing. Even though Jesus says, no, I'm fulfilling it. We look at what Jesus does and we're like, Jesus, he disobeyed the law. He changed the law. You know what's interesting about that? The Pharisees thought Jesus changed the law too. And they wanted to stone him for it. And yet we continue to go on to say, anyway, I digress. There's a reason that from day one of being here with y'all, there's a reason I started with an overview of the narrative. It's because you have to set the law in the story. Okay? Because when you pull out the law and you make it this statutory thing and you start reading about sacrifices and they'll be forgiven, you start thinking, this is all about how they got to heaven. And nobody could do it, nobody could keep the law, nobody could be perfect, so on and so forth. And The law is just this horrible thing that I'm so glad I don't have to live under the law, because I would be living under the oppression of not being able to do it, and Jesus saved me from that. And you start running all this crap, and at its core is a statutory reading of the law that fails to recognize God's heart and God's love and His care and His concern for the vulnerable. You think about this, all right? And I will end with this. You think about the gospel. God's heart in Torah is care for the vulnerable. We've seen it, right? We've seen it in the don't muzzle the ox law. We've seen it in the leave some olives off your tree, etc. law. We've seen it in the slave law. His heart is for the vulnerable and lifting the vulnerable up. What did Jesus do? Jesus came to reveal God. Okay? Jesus' purpose that He Himself states, here's why I came. It's to reveal the Father. And how does He do it? By recognizing that we are made vulnerable in our sin, and He finds a way to lift us up out of that vulnerability. And you're going to tell me He's saving the law? He's saving us from the law? He's doing the law. We'll see as we work through a little more of Exodus, and then we'll flip over to some Jesus stuff, and you'll get a better picture of it. Okay? But I think we can all understand, without knowing any of the details of the Old Testament, I think we can all understand that there's a heart for the vulnerable and for lifting up the vulnerable out of their vulnerability. And when Jesus comes to reveal who God is, to reveal the heart and the will of the Father, of course, He's going to identify the vulnerable and do anything and everything it takes to provide a way to lift us up out of our vulnerability. I'm at that awkward moment where I don't know what else to say other than see you on Wednesday.
Come on.